I'm Devin, 32, owner of a successful restaurant group in Boston. Growing up in a wealthy family should have been a blessing, but my parents' emotional coldness left scars deeper than anyone could see. Despite building a culinary empire from nothing, I never earned their approval. That night at the fancy dinner when they called me a worthless fraud in front of everyone, they had no idea I owned the prestigious venue where they Saturday. Revenge, as they say, is a dish best served alongside a perfect main course. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on my parents, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button while I prepare to serve the coldest dish of all justice. Growing up in Wellesley, Massachusetts, was like living in a beautiful but sterile museum. Our colonial-style home with its manicured lawn and perfect white trim stood as a monument to my parents' obsession with appearance. Howard and Margaret Walsh weren't just my parents. They were institutions unto themselves. My father, Howard, built his reputation as one of Boston's most cutthroat corporate attorneys. His clients included CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and his name carried weight in every country club and boardroom in New England. He worked 80-hour weeks, came home with his tie still perfectly knotted, and expected nothing less than perfection from his children. Margaret, my mother, treated social climbing like an Olympic sport. Her charity galas and committee memberships weren't about giving back. They were calculated moves on her personal chessboard of influence. She knew everyone who mattered and made sure they knew her too. Our home hosted dinner parties where senators and business leaders clinked crystal glasses while discussing politics and stock portfolios. In this environment, appearance wasn't just important, it was everything. My clothes were always pressed, my hair perfectly cut, and my schedule filled with appropriate activities. Piano lessons, tennis coaching, academic tutoring, all designed to create the perfect son they could brag about at their social gatherings. The first time I discovered my passion for cooking, I was 9 years old. Our housekeeper, Lucia, let me help make pasta from scratch. The feeling of the dough between my fingers, the transformation of simple ingredients into something beautiful, it was magic to me. When I proudly told my parents about it at dinner, my father barely looked up from his Wall Street journal. "That's nice," he said without interest, before immediately turning to my brother. "Aaron, tell us about your science project." Aaron was 4 years older than me, and everything I wasn't in my parents' eyes. He was studious, serious, and set on becoming a doctor from the time he could talk. His report cards were framed. Mine were scrutinized for any grade below an A. When Aaron was accepted to Johns Hopkins pre-med at 17, my parents threw a party with 50 guests. When I won a regional young chef competition at 12, they didn't even attend the ceremony. "We have an important fundraiser that night," my mother had explained, checking her makeup in the hallway mirror. "I'm sure you understand, darling. It's for cancer research." What hurt most was that Aaron did try to bridge the gap. He came to my competitions when he could. He praised my cooking and encouraged my passion, but even his support couldn't fill the void left by my parents' indifference. "Real men don't cook," Devin, my father, told me repeatedly. "Real men build businesses, argue cases, perform surgery. They don't play around in kitchens." Each time he said it, the words cut deeper. By 14, I'd started hiding my culinary magazines under my mattress like they were something shameful. My mother's approach was more subtle but equally damaging. She never directly criticized my cooking, just dismissed it with faint praise and changed the subject. "That's a lovely little hobby, Devin," she would say, after trying something I made. "Now, have you thought about which colleges you'll apply to? The Harrison's son just got into Yale, early decision." High school graduation should have been a proud moment, but it became another reminder of where I stood in the family hierarchy. My parents attended the ceremony, but left immediately after I received my diploma. Aaron was receiving an award at medical school that evening, and they couldn't miss it. They didn't even stay for the photos. The real breaking point came during a family dinner the summer after graduation. I'd been accepted to both the business school my father demanded and the Culinary Institute of America. For weeks I'd practiced my speech about following my passion. "I've decided to attend culinary school," I announced over the prime rib my father had catered from his favorite steakhouse. "I've been accepted to CIA with a partial scholarship." The silence that followed felt eternal. My mother set down her fork. My father's face flushed red. Aaron looked at his plate. "That's not happening," Howard said finally. "I've already told the dean at Wharton to expect you." "Dad, I don't want to be a businessman or a lawyer. I want to be a chef." My mother intervened in her deceptively gentle way. "Darling, cooking is a fine hobby, but it's not a career for someone from our background. Think about your future." "This is my future. It's what I love." My father's hand hit the table hard enough to make the crystal water glasses jump. "Enough. This discussion is over. You'll attend Wharton as planned, or you'll receive not one penny of support from us. Is that clear?" Looking at their faces, I realized I had no allies in that room, not even Aaron, who stared silently at his food. The ultimatum hung in the air like a guillotine. Without their financial support, I couldn't afford either school. With no savings and no way to get loans without their co-signing, I was trapped. "Yes, sir," I finally said, feeling something inside me crack and break. That night I lay awake, planning how I would survive business school while keeping my real passion alive. I wouldn't let them extinguish my dream. I would just have to find another path to it. Wharton was exactly as I expected, prestigious, demanding, and utterly miserable for me. While other students thrived on case studies and financial projections, I spent nights researching restaurant business models and innovative cooking techniques. My textbooks were filled with notes about food costs and menu planning rather than stock options and corporate mergers. The one bright spot was meeting Professor Richardson in my second semester. Unlike most faculty who were former executives or finance whizzes, Professor Richardson had actually built several successful businesses from the ground up, including a small chain of specialty food stores. After class one day, he kept me back. "Devin, your paper on small business growth strategies was interesting. You focused entirely on independent restaurants while everyone else wrote about tech startups or consulting firms." I braced for criticism, but instead he smiled. "It was the most original analysis I read. You clearly understand the restaurant industry. Is that where your passion lies?" That simple question opened the floodgates. For the first time, I told someone the whole story. My love of cooking, my parents' opposition, my reluctant presence at business school. "That's a waste," he said bluntly when I finished. "Not the business education that can be valuable for any entrepreneur, but denying your actual passion. Why not do both?" With Professor Richardson's mentorship, I started a small catering business from my dorm room. It began with simple study break snacks for fellow students during finals week. Word spread quickly, and soon I was catering small events for campus organizations. My first real breakthrough came when Professor Richardson recommended me for a faculty reception. The dean of the business school was impressed enough to ask for my card, which I had to create overnight at a 24-hour print shop. When I called home that weekend to share my success, my mother's response was predictable. "That's nice, dear, but I hope it's not interfering with your actual studies. Your father would be very disappointed if your grades suffered because of this distraction." Thanksgiving break. My sophomore year became a defining moment. I offered to cook the entire meal, spending days planning a menu that would showcase everything I'd learned. I woke up at 5 a.m. to start preparing, and by the time my family gathered at 4 p.m., the table was set with a feast that could have been photographed for a magazine. My father barely glanced at the spread before asking, "Did you remember to chill the white wine?" Aaron at least took photos of every dish and genuinely complimented my work. My mother picked at her food, taking tiny bites and leaving most of it untouched. "The turkey is a bit dry, darling," she said, though everyone else was having seconds. "And I think the stuffing has too many herbs." Later that night, I overheard them in the study. "He's still playing with food," my father said. "All that money for a Wharton education, and he's more interested in being a cook." Christmas break was worse. At our extended family gathering, I overheard my mother telling my Aunt Devin's doing well at Wharton, though he still has this little hobby of cooking. Just a phase, I'm sure he'll grow out of it once he starts his internship at Morgan Stanley. The internship they had arranged without consulting me. The future they had planned without my input. Aaron tried to mediate as always. "They just want what's best for you," he said as we walked around the neighborhood on Christmas Eve, in their own way. "Their way isn't my way," I replied, "and I'm done pretending." When I returned for spring semester, I made my decision. After discussing it with Professor Richardson, I applied to transfer to the culinary program at Johnson & Wales in Providence. It wasn't CIA, but it was respected, and, more importantly, I could afford it with my catering savings and student loans I could qualify for on my own. The phone call to my parents was as bad as I expected. "You're throwing your life away," my father stated coldly. "If you do this, you're on your own. Completely." "Howard, surely we can discuss this," I heard my mother say in the background. "No, he wants to be a cook instead of someone respectable." "Fine, but not on our dime." True to his word, my parents cut me off completely. My tuition payment for the next semester disappeared. My health insurance was canceled. The credit card they monitored but had allowed me to use for emergencies was deactivated. I moved out of my comfortable apartment into a tiny room I shared with 2 other culinary students. I took every catering job I could find while attending classes. On weekends, I worked as a line cook at a local diner. During breaks, I picked up shifts washing dishes at upscale restaurants just to learn by watching their chefs work. The day I graduated with honors from Johnson & Wales, I scanned the audience out of habit, still half expecting to see my family despite knowing better. Aaron had called to apologize. He was in his medical residency and couldn't get away. My parents didn't even acknowledge receiving the invitation I'd sent. As I accepted my diploma, I made a silent promise to myself. I would succeed not just despite them, but because of what they'd taught me about determination and self-reliance, lessons they'd never intended to give. The day after graduation, reality hit hard. With student loans coming due and barely enough savings for first month's rent, I moved into a basement apartment in Somerville that generously could be called functional. The bathroom sink also served as my kitchen sink. The refrigerator hummed so loudly I had to unplug it to sleep. But it was 15 minutes by train to my new job at Bistro Lafayette, a small neighborhood French restaurant in Cambridge. Starting as a commis chef, the lowest position in the kitchen hierarchy, I earned just above minimum wage. Chef Marco DeSantis ran his kitchen like a benevolent dictator, demanding perfection but willing to teach those who showed promise. Unlike most chefs who protected their recipes like state secrets, Marco believed in sharing knowledge. "You cannot own technique," he told me one night after service, as we sat drinking cheap beer on the back steps of the restaurant. "You can only borrow it, improve it, pass it on." Those late nights with Marco taught me more than culinary school ever could. He became the mentor and father figure I'd always wanted. When I mentioned this once, his response was characteristically blunt. "Your father is an idiot. Any man who cannot see his son's talent is blind." My apartment was so depressing that I spent most of my time at the restaurant, arriving hours before my shift and staying late to experiment with leftover ingredients Marco let me use. My diet consisted mainly of staff meals and recipe tests, not that I could afford much else. My parents called occasionally, conversations that inevitably left me feeling worse. They'd ask about that restaurant job with the same tone one might use for a prison sentence, then launch into updates about Aaron's prestigious surgical residency or friends' children working at Goldman Sachs. The Peterson's son just made junior partner at his law firm, my mother mentioned during one call. He's buying a condo in Back Bay. "Isn't that where you're living now, darling?" I didn't correct her assumption that I could afford to live in one of Boston's most expensive neighborhoods. After 10 months of 18-hour days and relentless focus, Marco promoted me to sous chef when his previous second-in-command left for a position in New York. "You earned this," he said, handing me the restaurant's spare set of good knives. "Not because you work hard. Everyone should work hard. Because you see food as it should be seen, as transformation, not just sustenance." The promotion came with a modest raise that allowed me to move to a slightly less terrible apartment, this one with separate bathroom and kitchen, sinks a luxury that made me unreasonably happy. Around this time, Aaron made a surprise visit to the restaurant. He'd completed his residency and taken a position at Massachusetts General Hospital. I hadn't seen him in almost 2 years. "Mom and Dad don't know I'm here," he admitted, after I served him what Marco called the full treatment, a 5-course meal I designed specifically for him. "This is incredible, Devin. You're really good at this." Good enough to deserve a visit from my parents, I asked, the old hurt surfacing despite my best efforts. Aaron sighed. I've tried. They're set in their ways. Dad still talks about how you'll come to your senses eventually. After 3 years, you know how stubborn Aaron hesitated. I could invite them here for dinner. They don't have to know you're the chef. The offer was tempting, but I shook my head. I don't want them here under false pretenses. When they come, it will be because they want to try my food knowing it's mine. They never came despite Aaron's repeated invitations. I tried calling once to personally invite them for my special tasting menu, but my mother made excuses about their busy schedule, and my father didn't come to the phone. Life changed dramatically when I met Julia Chen at a food festival, where Bistro Lafayette had a booth. She was running a small specialty food import business, and had a keen eye for quality and trends. After trying my mushroom and truffle arancini, she returned 3 times with different friends, then finally asked to speak with me. You're wasted here, she said bluntly, handing me her business card. This food deserves its own showcase. Call me when you're ready to talk about your own place. I laughed it off at first. Opening a restaurant required capital I didn't have. But Julia was persistent, calling the restaurant and leaving messages until I finally agreed to meet her for coffee. I believe in data and instinct equally, she said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside was a business plan template market analysis of Boston's restaurant scene and potential locations with price estimates. My instinct says you're special. The data says there's a market gap for what you do. Together we could fill it. Julia had business acumen. I lacked connections I needed, and most importantly, complete faith in my culinary vision. Where my parents saw a waste of potential, she saw untapped opportunity. We spent 6 months refining our business plan, meeting in her office or my apartment kitchen, where I'd cook potential menu items while she crunched numbers. Securing funding was our biggest hurdle. Bank after bank rejected our loan applications. Too risky, they said. Restaurants fail. No collateral. Each rejection felt like my father's voice in my ear. Playing with food isn't a real career. On our 8th attempt, Suffolk Community Bank took a chance on us, partly because Julia's family had banked there for 20 years. The loan was smaller than we'd hoped, but enough to lease a rundown former cafe in Brookline and begin renovations. The building was in worse shape than the realtor had disclosed. The kitchen needed complete rewiring. The floor had water damage. The ventilation system violated at least 3 building codes. Our construction budget evaporated in the first month, and we still needed equipment. I sold my car. Julia took a second mortgage on her condo. We hired culinary students to help with renovations in exchange for future employment. We scoured restaurant auctions for second-hand equipment. By opening day, we had exactly $876 left in our business account. Not enough to make payroll if the first week wasn't successful. The night before our grand opening, I sat alone in the empty restaurant, surrounded by tables we'd built ourselves and walls we'd painted by hand. I'd never felt more terrified or more alive. If we failed, my parents would be right about everything. If we succeeded, opening night was a blur of controlled chaos. We'd kept the menu small and focused, just 8 starters, 6 entrees, and 4 desserts, but every dish had to be perfect. Julia managed the front of house while I commanded the kitchen, a team of just 3, including myself. At 8 p.m., we had a line out the door. By 10, we'd run out of 2 entrees. By midnight, we were cleaning up and calculating the night's revenue, exhausted but exhilarated. We'd made it through day 1. Now we just had to do it again tomorrow, and the next day, and every day after that. The first year of Roots, our restaurant named for my commitment to honoring traditional techniques while creating something new, was a constant battle for survival. The 16-hour days at Bistro Lafayette now seemed easy compared to the 18 to 20-hour days of restaurant ownership. Each month brought new crises, equipment breakdowns, staff turnover, supplier problems, and the constant pressure of meeting payroll and rent. Julia and I paid ourselves last and least often, taking home less than our line cooks. I lived on staff meals and coffee, pouring every penny back into the restaurant. Our turning point came 8 months in, when Thomas Raymond, Boston's most influential food critic, dined anonymously at Roots. We didn't know he was there until his review appeared in the Boston Herald the following Wednesday. In a city saturated with pretentious culinary trends, he wrote, Roots offers something revolutionary honest food prepared with exceptional skill and surprising creativity. Chef Devin Walsh transforms familiar ingredients into dishes that feel simultaneously new and timeless. His seared scallops with brown butter and sage velouté alone justify the journey to this unassuming Brookline establishment. The morning the review published, our reservation line rang non-stop. Within 24 hours, we were booked solid for 6 weeks. Julia hired 2 additional servers and a host. I brought in another line cook and a pastry chef. We extended our hours and added Sunday brunch. The sudden success should have been validating, but my parents' absence still stung. I called to tell them about the review, hoping this external validation might finally impress them. "That's nice, dear," my mother said distractedly. "Did I tell you Aaron just got published in the New England Journal of Medicine?" Aaron, to his credit, became one of our most loyal customers. He brought colleagues' dates and eventually his fiancée Rebecca to the restaurant regularly. He proudly introduced me as my brother the chef to everyone he brought, and always insisted on paying full price despite my offers of family discounts. "You earned this," he told me unconsciously, echoing Marco's words from years earlier. "I want to support your business, not take advantage of our relationship." As our first anniversary approached, Julia and I expanded the menu and renovated the bar area to accommodate waiting guests. Boston Magazine named us Best New Restaurant, bringing another wave of customers and attention. A local cooking show invited me to demonstrate recipes, leading to regular appearances that built my reputation beyond the restaurant walls. The acknowledgement from the culinary community was heartening, but my parents remained unmoved. They never visited the restaurant, never mentioned it to friends, never asked meaningful questions about my business. When I sent them gift certificates for their anniversary, they went unused. Julia, seeing my disappointment despite our success, suggested we consider expansion. "Your food deserves a bigger audience," she said during our weekly financial meeting, "and the numbers support it. We could open a second location." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Our first location was finally stable, but expansion would mean more debt, more risk, more potential for failure. Yet it also meant growth recognition and the chance to prove beyond any doubt that my career choice was valid. "If we do this," I said, "I want to go upscale, downtown, somewhere they can't ignore." Julia raised an eyebrow but nodded. We both knew who they were. Finding investors was easier this time. Our track record at Roots spoke for itself, and several regular customers expressed interest in backing our new venture. Among them was a successful real estate developer who offered us a prime location in Back Bay at below-market rent in exchange for a 15% stake. Essence opened 18 months after Roots, with a more refined concept and higher price point. The decor was elegant but warm, featuring natural materials and soft lighting. The menu focused on New England ingredients prepared with global influences, a reflection of my training with Marco and my own evolving style. The opening received coverage in Boston Magazine, The Globe, and several food blogs. A photo of me in the kitchen appeared on the cover of the lifestyle section. I sent a copy to my parents with a note inviting them to the friends and family preview night. They sent regrets due to a charity event. Despite their continued indifference, I was becoming known in Boston's culinary scene. Other chefs sought my advice or invited me to collaborate on special events. Cooking schools asked me to give guest lectures. Food distributors offered exclusive products. 3 years after opening Roots, we had the opportunity to purchase the building outright when our landlord decided to retire. The bank that had once reluctantly given us a small loan now eagerly approved our mortgage application. Owning the building gave us security and asset equity we could leverage for further growth. When Aaron mentioned this achievement to our parents at Sunday dinner, my father reportedly scoffed. "Playing restaurant is fine as a diversion," he told Aaron, "but it's hardly a legacy business. No one remembers who cooked their dinner last year." By this point, I'd stopped trying to win their approval. Their opinions, once so crushing, had diminished in importance as my confidence and success grew. I still felt the hurt, but it no longer defined me. I had created my own family among my staff, fellow chefs, and loyal customers who valued what I offered the world. As Julia and I celebrated 5 years since opening Roots, we now owned a restaurant group with 5 successful venues: the original Roots, the upscale Essence, a casual lunch spot called Daily Bread, a specialty bakery, and a cocktail bar with small plates. Each operated profitably and contributed to our growing reputation in the New England culinary scene. I had finally found my place in the world, even if it wasn't the one my parents had envisioned for me. 5 years into our restaurant journey, Julia and I sat in our shared office above Roots, reviewing expansion proposals. What had started as a single struggling restaurant had evolved into Walsh Hospitality Group, encompassing 5 distinct venues and employing over 100 people. "The numbers look good across all properties," Julia said, sliding a financial report across the desk. "Especially Essence. It's outperforming our projections by 22% this quarter." Essence had become our flagship restaurant, occupying a historic building downtown with soaring ceilings and original brick walls. The renovation had preserved the character while adding modern amenities and an open kitchen where diners could watch their meals being prepared. The restaurant had earned a Michelin star in the guide's recent expansion to Boston, a validation that still felt surreal. Our clientele at Essence included celebrities passing through Boston politicians, business leaders, and serious food enthusiasts. We maintained a strict, no preferential treatment policy, making everyone wait for reservations equally, a policy that ironically made the tables even more desirable. "We've had another inquiry about franchise opportunities," Julia continued, referencing an email from a hotel group, "and Food and Wine wants to feature you in their Empire Builders issue." The national recognition was flattering, but what excited me most was a property that had recently come on the market: Hawthorne House, a 19th-century mansion on the outskirts of Boston that had operated as a wedding venue until its owners retired. The building was magnificent, with original woodwork, multiple fireplaces, and extensive grounds that included an apple orchard and herb gardens. "It's perfect for what we've been discussing," I told Julia, pulling up photos on my laptop. "An ultra-exclusive dining experience. 20 seats maximum, tasting menu only, reservations months in advance." Julia studied the numbers. "The purchase price is steep, but with our current equity position and projections." She nodded slowly. "We could make it work. What would you call it?" "The Residence," I said immediately, "because it should feel like being invited to the most amazing dinner party in someone's home." Within 3 months, we closed on the property and began careful renovations to preserve its historic character while creating a state-of-the-art kitchen. I developed a seasonal tasting menu that would change monthly, featuring the most exquisite ingredients I could source. We hired staff with Michelin star experience and trained them rigorously. The Residence opened quietly with no advertising beyond a simple website with a reservation form. Within a week, we had requests for bookings 6 months out. The exclusivity and quality justified the $400 per person price tag, and soon we had a waiting list of people hoping for cancellations. Shortly after the Residence opened, I received an unexpected call from the producer of Kitchen Masters, a popular cooking competition show. They wanted me as a contestant for their upcoming season featuring established chefs from around the country. "It's filmed in Los Angeles over 3 weeks," the producer explained. "The exposure would be tremendous for your restaurants." I hesitated, reluctant to leave my kitchens for so long, but Julia insisted it was an opportunity we couldn't pass up. "Your executive chefs can handle operations," she argued. "This is about building your personal brand." The competition was grueling but exhilarating. I advanced through round after round, eventually placing as first runner-up in the finale. The exposure was indeed tremendous. Our reservation requests doubled following the show's airing, and our social media followers increased tenfold. Most surprisingly, the morning after the finale aired, I received a call from my mother. "Darling, we had no idea you were so accomplished," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone of calculated enthusiasm she reserved for social calls. "Everyone at the club was talking about seeing you on television. The Baldwins were so impressed. Apparently they've been to your restaurant downtown and had no idea you were our son." For a moment I was speechless. After years of indifference, now they were interested because their social circle was impressed. Yes, I own several restaurants now, I said neutrally. The one the Baldwins visited is probably Essence. It received a Michelin star last year. A star. How marvelous. Your father and I must come dine there soon. We've been so busy with his firm's expansion and my foundation work. I managed a polite response, but after hanging up I sat staring at the phone, a mixture of emotions churning inside me. Part of me still yearned for their approval, while another part was angry at their transparent attempt to claim connection to my success, now that it served their social standing. Aaron called later that day. Fair warning, Mom and Dad watched your show last night with the Richardsons and the Coopers. Dad was suddenly very proud of his culinary entrepreneur son. 7 years too late, I commented. 8, but who's counting Aaron's side? They're talking about bringing a group from Dad's firm to your restaurant. Apparently it's the new hot thing to have a personal connection to a celebrity chef. 2 days later, I received a call from my father's assistant. Howard's law firm Walsh Morgan & Associates wanted to book the residents for their annual partners' dinner. 30 people, full buyout, no budget constraints. Mr. Walsh mentioned his son owns the venue, the assistant said. He thought you might have availability, despite the waiting list. I should have felt triumph. Finally, my father wanted what I had built. Instead, I felt a complex mix of vindication and lingering hurt. He still hadn't called personally, still hadn't acknowledged his years of dismissal. After consulting with Julia, I made a decision. We can accommodate them, I told the assistant. Please don't mention that I'll be personally overseeing the event. I'd like to ensure they receive our standard service without any special considerations. In other words, I wouldn't tell my father I'd be cooking for him and his colleagues. He would discover it when I walked into the dining room. As the date approached, I meticulously planned every detail of the dinner. The menu would feature my most impressive techniques, my most luxurious ingredients, my most memorable presentations, not to show off but to definitively demonstrate that cooking was not playing. It was art, craft, and business combined. Aaron called the night before the dinner. Are you sure about this? You know how Dad can be when he feels ambushed. I'm not ambushing him, I replied. I'm doing my job. He's the one who booked my restaurant without bothering to call me directly. Mom's excited, Aaron offered. She's been telling everyone about her chef son all week. I laughed humorlessly. Funny how having a chef son is suddenly acceptable when he's on television. People change, Devin. Maybe give them a chance. I wanted to believe that was possible. But as I reviewed the dinner service plan with my staff that night, I couldn't help wondering if this meeting would bring resolution or simply open old wounds. The day of the partners' dinner, I arrived at the residence at noon, 6 hours before the scheduled event. The historic mansion looked particularly impressive that evening, with landscape lighting illuminating its classical facade and the early autumn gardens still in bloom. Inside, my team was already preparing. The dining room table, a massive single piece of walnut that seated 30, was being set with our finest china, crystal, and silver. Fresh flowers from our garden filled antique vases. The sommelier was decanting wines for early courses and checking temperature on the cellared reds. In the kitchen, my executive chef Daniel and I reviewed the menu one final time. First course, chilled Maine lobster, with caviar, preserved lemon, and edible flowers. Second course, wild, mushroom velouté with truffle foam and herb oil. Third course, seared day boat scallops with brown butter emulsion. Fourth course, intermezzo of champagne sorbet with gold leaf. Fifth course, dry-aged prime beef, with bone marrow crust and compressed vegetables. Sixth course, selection of artisanal cheeses, with house-made preserves. Seventh course, deconstructed chocolate and hazelnut dessert with smoked sea salt. Each dish represented a milestone in my culinary journey. The lobster, inspired by my first restaurant job, the velouté, a refined version of what I'd made at culinary school. The scallops that had earned my first major review, the sorbet from my television appearance. The beef that had won us our Michelin star, the cheese course, featuring local producers I'd championed, and finally the dessert that had become my signature at the residence. Everything must be perfect, I told my staff during our pre-service meeting. These are important clients. I didn't mention that my parents would be among the guests. At exactly 6:30, the first luxury cars began arriving. I watched from an upstairs window as the valets greeted the guests. My parents arrived in their Mercedes at 6:45. My father characteristically punctual, my mother elegant in a black evening dress, her pearls catching the light as she stepped from the car. From my vantage point, I could see my father gesturing expansively to his colleagues, clearly taking credit for securing the exclusive venue. My mother smiled graciously, accepting compliments from the other guests, as if the residence were her own home. The maître d' escorted the group through the house, offering a brief history of the property before leading them to the main dining room, where champagne and canapés awaited. I moved to the kitchen, now buzzing with focused energy, as the team prepared for service. Through the kitchen's monitor system, I watched my father hold court at the head of the table. He raised his champagne flute in a toast. "To Walsh, Morgan and Associates," he proclaimed. "Another record year deserves an exceptional celebration. I'm told getting a reservation here typically requires knowing someone quite important." He chuckled, and his partners joined in. "Fortunately, I have connections in the right places." My mother beamed beside him, nodding, as if confirming his influence had secured this exclusive experience. The first course went out flawlessly. From the kitchen monitors, I watched as the guests admired the presentation and savored the flavors. My father seemed pleased with himself as his colleagues complimented the food. For the second course, I personally finished each bowl of velouté with the truffle foam, creating an intricate design atop each serving. The servers delivered them with synchronized precision, and again appreciative murmurs filled the dining room. After the third course, one of my father's partners, an older gentleman named Richardson, asked our server about the chef. "This is extraordinary," he said. "Is the chef owner here tonight? I'd love to compliment him personally." The server, as instructed, replied, "Chef Walsh is indeed overseeing your dinner this evening. He often greets guests between courses. I'll let him know you're enjoying the meal." From the monitor, I saw my mother's head turn sharply at the mention of my name. She whispered something to my father, whose expression changed from satisfaction to what appeared to be confusion. It was time. As the intermezzo course was being prepared, I removed my kitchen jacket, replaced it with a fresh one, and straightened my chef's apron. Taking a deep breath, I pushed through the kitchen doors and entered the dining room. "Good evening," I said, projecting my voice confidently across the table. "I'm Devin Walsh, executive chef and owner of the residence. I hope you're enjoying your dinner so far." The table responded with enthusiastic compliments, while my parents sat frozen in their seats. My father's face had flushed red, a sign I recognized from childhood as suppressed anger. My mother's smile remained fixed, but her knuckles were white around her water glass. "Walsh," said one partner, looking between my father and me, "are you related to Howard?" Before I could answer, my father stood, forcing a jovial laugh. "Indeed, this is my son. I was keeping it a surprise." He clapped me on the shoulder as if we were the closest of relations. "Devin has built quite the little restaurant empire here in Boston." Little Richardson raised an eyebrow. "From what I hear, getting into this place is harder than getting a Supreme Court appointment. The residence is the most exclusive dining venue in New England." My father's grip on my shoulder tightened. "We've always encouraged Devin's entrepreneurial spirit," he said smoothly, "though I admit I originally thought he would join the firm." The partners seemed delighted by the connection, peppering me with questions about the restaurant, the historic building, and my culinary background. I answered graciously, maintaining my professional demeanor, while acutely aware of my mother's strained smile and my father's barely contained discomfort. As I prepared to return to the kitchen, my father followed me into the hallway. "You might have warned me," he said in a low voice once we were out of earshot. "Your office called to book the residence," I replied calmly. "They mentioned you knew I owned it. I knew you had some connection to the place. Your mother mentioned something about it after that cooking show. I didn't realize you'd be here personally. I oversee all private events at this location." He straightened his tie, a nervous habit I remembered from childhood. "Well, it's working out nicely. My partners are impressed with the connection." "I'm glad your colleagues are enjoying themselves," I said neutrally. His expression hardened slightly. "Don't make this awkward, Devin. Tonight is important for the firm." I'm simply doing my job, providing the dining experience your office requested." He nodded curtly and returned to the dining room. I went back to the kitchen to oversee preparation of the main course. During the beef course, I watched on the monitor as my mother excused herself. Moments later, she appeared at the kitchen door, her practiced social smile in place. "Darling, what a lovely surprise," she said, air-kissing near my cheek. "Your father and I had no idea you'd be here tonight." "This is my restaurant, Mother," I replied, continuing to inspect plates before they went out. "I'm here most nights." Of course, of course." She glanced around the kitchen, taking in the professional operation with what seemed like genuine surprise. "It's all so legitimate." The word choice wasn't lost on me. "Did you expect something less?" No, it's just, we never really understood the extent of your business." She watched as I placed a perfect quenelle of potato puree on each plate. "Your father's partners are quite impressed. The Richardsons apparently tried to get a reservation for months. We're booked 6 months out typically." Her eyes widened slightly. 6 months? For dinner?" I nodded, focusing on the plates rather than her reaction. "You should return to the table, Mother. The main course is about to be served." As she left, I heard her murmur to my sous chef. He always was stubborn, just like his father. I returned to the dining room with the cheese course, describing each selection and its producer. The partners were thoroughly enjoying themselves, some taking photos of the presentation, others asking detailed questions about the aging process or milk sources. As I circulated around the table, I overheard my father speaking quietly to my mother. "At least he's made something of himself, even if it's just playing restaurateur. These connections could be useful for the firm." My mother replied, "He's still the same, Devon dear, always wanting attention, always needing to prove something." "A worthless fraud playing restaurant," my father muttered, not realizing I was directly behind him. "But if it impresses the partners—" I froze the cheese platter still in my hands. Several guests looked up, having heard the comment. An uncomfortable silence fell over that section of the table. My father turned and saw me standing there. For a moment his composure slipped, showing something between embarrassment and defiance. I set down the platter carefully. "Mr. Walsh," I said loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "I'm pleased. The residents could host your firm tonight. Perhaps you'd be interested to know that, in addition to this little restaurant, I own the building you're sitting in along with 4 other restaurant properties in Boston. Walsh Hospitality Group employs over 100 people and generates annual revenue of 8 figures." Several partners raised their eyebrows, looking at my father with new interest. "The worthless fraud playing restaurant you see before you was featured in Food and Wine last month and has a Michelin star at his flagship location," I continued calmly. "But I understand if that doesn't meet the Walsh standard of accomplishment." My father's face had turned from red to white. My mother looked as if she might faint. I turned to the table. "Please enjoy your cheese course. Dessert will follow shortly. If you need anything at all, our staff is at your service." With that, I returned to the kitchen, my heart pounding but my exterior professional and composed. Once through the doors, I leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths. My staff studiously focused on their work, pretending they hadn't heard the confrontation through the slightly open door. Daniel approached, concern in his eyes. "Chef, are you okay?" I straightened up. "Perfectly fine. Let's make sure the dessert course is exceptional." When the dessert was ready, I decided to serve it personally, to each guest. I started at the opposite end from my parents, working my way around the table, briefly explaining the components of the deconstructed chocolate creation to each diner. When I reached my father, I placed his dessert before him with the same care I'd shown every other guest. "For you, sir," I said formally. "I hope it meets your standards." He looked up at me, and for the first time that evening, perhaps for the first time in my adult life, I saw something like genuine respect in his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. "It's impressive, all of this." My mother touched my arm lightly. "Darling, everything has been wonderful. Truly." I nodded acknowledgement and continued serving. As I walked away, I heard my father explaining to his partners about my natural business acumen and how I'd always had an entrepreneurial spirit, rewriting history in real time. After dessert, as the group enjoyed coffee and petite fours in the library, my father approached me near the fireplace. "Your mother and I would like to speak with you before we leave," he said, his tone difficult to read. I nodded. "I'll be in my office upstairs when you're ready." The confrontation I'd both feared and fantasized about for years was about to happen, but standing in the mansion I owned, surrounded by the success I'd built without their help or approval, I felt ready for whatever came next. The evening wound down gradually. Partners and their spouses said their goodbyes, many stopping to compliment me personally and request business cards for future reservations. Richardson, the senior partner who had asked about me during dinner, pulled me aside near the entrance. "That was extraordinary," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I've dined at 3-star restaurants in Paris that couldn't touch what you created tonight." He glanced toward my father, who was saying goodbyes to other guests. "Howard never mentioned you were so accomplished, though I suspect after tonight he'll be telling everyone." His insight was surprisingly accurate. After the last guest departed, my parents made their way upstairs to my office, a comfortable space with views of the garden and a small private terrace. I'd already asked Daniel to bring a bottle of cognac and 3 glasses. My father entered first, his demeanor more subdued than earlier. My mother followed, her social smile replaced by a more genuine if uncertain expression. "Please sit," I gestured to the leather armchairs. As Daniel quietly set down the cognac and glasses, I poured 3 measures and handed them each a snifter. For a moment we sat in silence. Then my father cleared his throat. "Your restaurant is impressive, Devon. The partners were extremely pleased with the evening." "Thank you," I replied. "That's always our goal." "How many establishments did you say you own now?" he asked. 5 restaurants plus this property. Walsh Hospitality Group employs 112 people as of last month. My father nodded, processing this information with the same expression he used when evaluating a business proposition. "Annual revenue in 8 figures, you mentioned." "Howard," my mother interjected, "surely we can discuss something other than finances." My father looked momentarily annoyed but nodded. "Of course. The food was exceptional. I had no idea you were so skilled." "You never asked," I said simply. "You never came to see what I was building." My mother leaned forward, her eyes suddenly moist. "Darling, we always wanted what was best for you. We worried about your future, your security." "No," I corrected gently. "You wanted what you thought was appropriate, what fit your vision of success. You never once asked what I wanted or valued what made me happy." My father's jaw tightened. "We gave you every opportunity. Until I chose a path you didn't approve of. Then you cut me off completely." "You were making a mistake," he insisted, though with less conviction than he might have years ago. "Was I?" I gestured to our surroundings. "This doesn't look like a mistake to me." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "We've missed so much of your life, Devon. Your success, your growth. Perhaps we were misguided in our approach." It wasn't exactly an apology, but from Margaret Walsh it was unprecedented. My father stared into his cognac for a long moment. "I built my career believing there was one path to respect and security. Law, medicine, finance. When you chose differently, I thought you were rejecting everything I valued, everything I tried to give you." "I rejected your path, not you," I said. "Though after you cut me off, the distinction became academic." He winced slightly. "We may have been overly harsh." Again, not an apology, but an admission I never expected to hear. "I don't need your approval anymore," I told them both. "I built this without you. I succeeded despite you, not because of you. I learned to measure myself by my own standards, not yours." My mother reached for my hand. I allowed the contact, though it felt strange after so many years of distance. "We're proud of you, Devon," she said, and for once, the words seemed genuine rather than performative. "What you've created here is remarkable. We were wrong not to support your passion." My father nodded slowly in agreement. "Your brother always told us we were making a mistake. He saw your potential even when we were blinded by our own expectations." We talked for another hour, the conversation gradually becoming less strained. They asked questions about my restaurants, my training, my team. For perhaps the first time they listened more than they spoke. As midnight approached, they prepared to leave. "We'd like to come to your restaurant," my mother said, at the door. "Essence, is it, the one with the star? As regular customers, not as parents expecting special treatment." I nodded. "I'll have my assistant call you to arrange it." My father extended his hand formally. I shook it, noting the slight tremble in his usually firm grip. "You've built something extraordinary here, Devon," he said quietly. "I was wrong about you, about all of this." It wasn't everything I had once hoped to hear from him, but it was more than I ever expected. After they left, I walked through the quiet restaurant now being meticulously cleaned by the overnight staff. In the kitchen, Daniel and the sous chefs were preparing for tomorrow, wiping down stations and restocking supplies. "Everything okay?" Chef Daniel asked, concern evident in his expression. I nodded. "Better than expected, actually." The following days brought a flurry of activity. Howard's partners all called for reservations at various restaurants in our group. The event coordinator at Walsh Morgan and Associates inquired about booking the residents for their holiday party. My father even forwarded an email from one partner who wanted to discuss potential investment in our next expansion. Aaron called the morning after the dinner. "So how did it go? Dad actually called me this morning to talk about your restaurants." I think that's the first time he's used the word restaurant without adding that little in front of it. "It was clarifying," I told him. "Not perfect, but better than I expected. They're trying Devon, in their limited, emotionally stunted way." I laughed. "When did you get so insightful about our parents?" "Probably around the time I started having to explain to my colleagues why they couldn't get reservations at my brother's restaurants," he replied. "Nothing like professional jealousy to make you reevaluate family dynamics." True to their word, my parents made a reservation at Essence the following month. They came as regular customers, waited their turn, and made no special requests. My father even refrained from telling their server about our relationship until after the meal, when he asked to send compliments to the chef. I came to their table briefly. Everything satisfactory. My mother beamed with what appeared to be genuine pride. "It was wonderful, darling. Truly exceptional." My father nodded agreement. The wine pairings were particularly impressive. "Your sommelier knows her business." It wasn't effusive praise by normal standards, but from Howard Walsh it was practically gushing. Over the following year, we established a new kind of relationship. Not close, not warm, but respectful and occasionally pleasant. They attended the opening of our 6th restaurant, standing awkwardly but determinedly among the crowd of food critics and industry people. My father even made a brief congratulatory speech when prompted, managing to avoid mentioning law school even once. At Aaron's wedding, 6 months later, my parents introduced me to their friends as our son, the acclaimed chef and restaurateur, without a hint of the dismissiveness that had once characterized their description of my career. The validation felt good, I admit. But what felt better was realizing I no longer needed it. I had built a life I was proud of, surrounded by people who valued my passion and supported my vision. I had proven myself not just to my parents, but more importantly to myself. One year after the fateful dinner at the residence, I invited my parents to my home for the first time. I cooked a simple meal, nothing like the elaborate tasting menus at my restaurants, just honest food prepared with care. My mother brought flowers. My father brought wine. We talked about normal things: Aaron's new house, my mother's charity work, an interesting case my father was consulting on. At one point, my father asked about our newest restaurant concept, listening attentively to my explanation of the business model and culinary direction. He offered a suggestion about the contract structure that was actually quite insightful. As I cleared the plates, my mother helped carry dishes to the kitchen. "You know," she said quietly, "your father keeps all the magazine articles about you in his office. He shows them to clients." I wasn't sure how to respond to this information. "That's nice." "We were wrong, Devon," she said simply. "We measured success by such a limited standard. You taught us there are many paths to creating something meaningful." It wasn't the dramatic reconciliation scene from a movie. There were no tearful embraces or profound declarations of transformed family dynamics. just small steps toward mutual respect and understanding. In the end, I learned that success isn't defined by anyone else's standards, not even your parents'. True satisfaction comes from building a life aligned with your own values and passions. The most meaningful revenge against those who doubted you isn't proving them wrong, though. That's certainly satisfying. It's creating a life so fulfilling that their opinion becomes irrelevant. My restaurants continue to thrive. My relationship with my parents continues to evolve, sometimes forward, occasionally backward, always complicated. But I no longer measure my worth through their eyes. That perhaps is the greatest success of all. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who didn't believe in your dreams? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you found my experience relatable, and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family expectations. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who might need encouragement to follow their own path. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, the most important approval is your own.